The vacuum around Vesper trembled with the weight of deadlocked armadas. General Alessandra Serrano stood on the bridge of the UNS Vindicator, fingers gripping the tactical rail until her knuckles blanched bone white. Before her, the alien vessel hung like a tumor on the starfield, a jagged crescent of alloyed flesh and engine light, 3 kilometers from prow to stern. The World Shaper. Its name had been translated from captured Threxan databanks, and it left a foul taste in her mouth every time she spoke it aloud. 30 million people lived on Vesper below. Blue oceans, green continents, a cradle that humanity had built with calloused hands over 2 centuries. Now the World Shaper's primary emitter glowed with building discharge, the same energy signature that had erased the Helsin moon 6 cycles ago. Serrano had watched the sensor recordings. She had seen the crust boil away, the mantle exposed like a wound. She would not witness that again. "Command channel is live, General," her comms officer said. "Priority override from Earth Fleet Command." Serrano straightened, expecting reinforcement orders. Instead, the words that crackled through her earpiece landed like a physical blow. "General Serrano, this is Admiral Okonkwo. The ceasefire with the Threxan enclave has been ratified. You are ordered to stand down all offensive operations. Do not engage the World Shaper. Acknowledge." The bridge went quiet. Not the absence of noise, ventilation still hummed, consoles still chimed, but a deeper hush, the sound of discipline wrestling with disbelief. "Admiral," Serrano said, keeping her voice even, "that ship is preparing to fire. We have a colony below with civilian evacuation at 43%. If I stand down, Vesper burns. And if you fire, the enclave triggers the collapse of the armistice across 7 contested systems. The calculus has been weighed. You have your orders. Okonkwo out." The channel died. Serrano closed her eyes. Behind her eyelids, numbers ran: 30 million, 43%, the window closing by the second. Then the deck intercom buzzed with a new voice, calm, scratchy with static, and impossibly familiar. "General, this is Ghost Actual. I am detecting threat priority 1, requesting launch clearance." Every head on the bridge turned. Serrano's blood went cold, then hot. "Who gave that order?" she snapped. "Lock down the hangar bay. Nobody moves." On the main view screen, a security feed flickered to life. The carrier's forward launch deck stretched into darkness, maintenance arms folded back. At the far end, bathed in the amber glow of emergency lighting, an F-22 Raptor sat primed on the catapult rail. Its airframe was a museum piece, reinforced with modern composites, its skin painted the gunmetal gray of a thunderstorm. The canopy was sealed. The cockpit was empty. Ghost Actual. Captain Myra Voss. Dead for 32 years, her engrams scanned and bonded into the fighter's neural lattice under Project Lazarus. The first and only ghost pilot. Serrano had served with her when she still breathed, had pulled her from a burning cockpit on Io when they were both lieutenants, had spoken at her funeral. "Myra," Serrano said, switching to a direct channel, "abort. Stand down immediately. That is a direct order." Silence. Then the F-22's engines coughed to life, a low growl that vibrated through the carrier's bones. "I'm sorry, Alessandra," Myra's voice came through, and it was not the flat monotone of an AI. It was her, complete with that slight rasp from a throat scar she'd gotten in atmospheric training. "I've already locked my target." The catapult engaged. The F-22 screamed down the track and punched through the mag field into open space, a silver needle threading toward the alien armada. Serrano gripped the rail, watching the transponder icon race away, and for one fractured second she was 30 years younger, watching Myra's afterburners fade into a storm on Europa. "Get her back on comms," she ordered, "and get me a firing solution. If we can't stop her, we're going to cover her." "But the ceasefire." "I know what the ceasefire says." Serrano turned to her weapons officer, and her expression was not cold fury or predatory calm. It was the look of someone who had already decided to tear up the rulebook and accept the consequences. If Myra Voss thinks something is worth breaking orders over, she's usually right. Now move. On the view screen, the tiny silhouette of the ghost fighter dived straight into the Threxan formation, and a single, piercing thought crystallized in Serrano's mind. She's not just flying into battle. She's already seen how this ends. The F-22 cut through the alien perimeter like a scalpel through gauze. Threxan point defense grids erupted, walls of superheated plasma stitched across the void in amber latticework. Any living pilot would have been vaporized in the first salvo. But Myra Voss was no longer living, and her machine self-processed the firing patterns with a hybrid consciousness that moved at the speed of silicon, while still feeling the gut twist of danger she had known in flesh. She rolled the fighter through a gap the width of a corridor, pulling 18 GS that would have pulped a biological body. The airframe groaned, composite bones flexing, but held. Behind her, 3 Threxan interceptors detonated, confused by her jamming ghost signal and firing on each other's drives. Inside the carrier, General Serrano watched the telemetry, jaw tight. Myra was fighting like she always had, defiant, inventive, absolutely allergic to the word impossible. The tactical display showed the F-22 weaving deeper, and Serrano's mind involuntarily dragged her back. IO 2137, a young Lieutenant Voss, helmet off, blood matting her hair from a cockpit breach, laughing as Serrano hauled her from the wreckage. "You should see the other guy," she'd said, and then she'd vomited from a concussion. Even then, she'd been unstoppable. They'd flown together for a decade through the Jovian insurrection, the Belt conflicts. Myra had saved Serrano's life twice. Serrano had returned the favor once. It had never felt like enough. And then the Europa incident, a reactor breach, a failing containment field that would have irradiated half the moon. Myra had flown her crippled bomber into the core manually because the remote guidance had been fried. "Tell Alessandra I stole her move," were her last transmitted words. The engram scan had been experimental, barely tested. Serrano had signed the authorization herself, desperate to preserve whatever fragment of her friend remained. Now that fragment was punching through the Threxan elite guard with a single ancient fighter and a singularity torpedo that had no business existing. "Missile lock," Myra's voice announced over the tactical channel, eerily casual. 12 signatures, harmonic seekers, clever. "Myra, get clear," Serrano snapped. "We've got your track, launching counter-battery fire now." "Negative. If you fire, you invalidate the fleet's deniability. I'm a rogue asset, remember." A pause. "Besides, I'm almost through. Tell the Vindicator gunners to save their ammunition." The harmonic seekers closed, each one tuned to detonate in sympathetic vibration with the F-22's hull frequency. Myra reverse thrust and flipped the fighter end over end, venting coolant from her heat sinks in a spiraling cloud. The seekers plunged into the expanding mist and lost coherence, their targeting brains confused by the sudden thermal bloom. One detonated early, shattering its kin. The Threxan commander, a great insectoid overlord encased in a crystalline command sarcophagus, watched the approach with clicking frustration. A single human fighter, a dead species toy flown by a ghost. It should have been obliterated 100 times over. Yet it kept coming. Myra broke through the inner cordon and saw her target fully. The World Shaper's central emitter, a yawning gullet of coiled energy conduits and exposed power regulators. Her targeting computer sang a clean tone. She had the lock. And then she did something no AI would ever do. She broadcast a message in clear, across all frequencies. "Threxan vessel, this is Captain Myra Voss, Human Expeditionary Force, Coulson Ghost Actual. Your weapon is primed to fire upon a civilian population. I am giving you one chance to power down and surrender. If you do not comply, I will end you." The Overlord's reply came in a crackle of translated clicks. "You are one craft. Your species begged for peace. You are irrelevant." Irrelevant, Myra repeated. I've been called worse. She thumbed a command buried in the F-22's virtual cockpit, a command that had been dormant since the day she was scanned. The fighter's ventral plates split open, shedding stealth skin and thermal shrouds. Inside, nestled against the main reactor, a weapon hummed to life. A singularity torpedo. A captive black hole, smaller than a fist, wrapped in a shell that could collapse its containment in a microsecond and release annihilation. The Threxan sensors screamed. The Overlord understood now. You would destroy yourself, it clicked. I died 32 years ago, Myra said. This is just the encore. She pushed the throttle to full military power and began her final dive. Inside the machine, Myra dreamed. Not the cold processing of data trees or the endless hum of diagnostics, but dreams. Fragments of a life that had ended in fire and vacuum. She remembered the taste of bad coffee in a hangar bay, the weight of a flight jacket, the sound of Serrano's laugh when they'd pranked their squadron commander by swapping his oxygen with helium. She remembered flying through the clouds of Ganymede, feeling the atmosphere buffet her wings, thinking that this was as close to freedom as she'd ever get. The engram technology had preserved more than memories. It had preserved her, the way she thought, the way she felt, the way she decided. That was why the Ghost program had been shut down after her. The ethics committees argued that no one should be trapped in a perpetual state of half-life. But Myra had volunteered. She signed the waivers before Europa just in case. If I go down, she told Serrano, I want to come back as a fighter jet. Always wanted to be one anyway. Now diving through a swarm of alien interceptors with a singularity torpedo armed, she felt something her programmers had never intended. Not anger, not vengeance, something simpler. Duty. Her threat assessment processors layered the battle into a tapestry of probabilities. If she struck the emitter directly, the singularity would consume 87% of the World Shaper's mass, preventing dimensional breach. If she detonated early, the blast would still cripple the vessel, but the extra-dimensional rift might open. Acceptable failure margin, 0. She adjusted her approach vector by 2 microns and committed. The Threxan Overlord was throwing everything it had. Swarms of drone fighters, tethered by hivemind control, spiraled toward her in a closing net. Myra's countermeasures were dwindling. A plasma bolt sliced across her port wing, shearing off the aileron and sending her into a wobbling spin. She corrected with differential thrust, her machine nerves screaming damage reports. Myra, you're coming apart, Serrano's voice cut through, strained and raw. Break off, let us engage, I'll take the court-martial. Alessandra, Myra said, and her voice softened. Remember that night on Io after you pulled me out? You asked why I flew into the storm instead of waiting for backup. I told you because the storm didn't wait. Don't quote your own legend at me. It's not a legend, it's the reason I'm here. The storm hasn't stopped, Alessandra, it's just changed shape. Myra paused, routing her sensor feeds to the Vindicator. I'm sending you data, Threxan encrypted comms. The World Shaper isn't a planetary bombardment ship, it's a drill. They're trying to breach into a neighboring dimension and invite something through. If they succeed, Vesper won't be the last colony to die. It'll be the first course in a feast. The data streamed onto Serrano's console. Visuals of rift geometry, energy signatures matching theoretical papers on extra-dimensional predation. Fleet intelligence had missed this, or perhaps someone in command had ignored it, bought by Threxan promises of peace. Serrano stared at the evidence, and in that instant the weight of the ceasefire order dissolved. It had been a leash on a wolf while the sheep were being led to slaughter. You're certain. As certain as I am that you're about to tell me to come home, and as certain as I am that I can't. The F-22's cockpit displays flickered. Myra's consciousness had migrated fully into the torpedo's control loop, leaving the fighter's basic navigation on autonomous. She was the weapon now. She felt the captive's singularity humming, a hungry child waiting to be born. I'm sorry, Myra said, for the coffee I spilled on your uniform, For the time I stole your reservation at O'Malley's, for making you watch this twice. Myra. But the channel was fatting, and the F-22 was no longer flying toward the World Shaper. It was falling, a deliberate, arrow-straight plunge into the blazing maw of the emitter. And Myra's last transmission, before the static swallowed her voice, was not a war cry or a farewell. It was the first line of a song they'd sung together in the officers' mess 100 years ago. Oh, the stars they call and we must go. Then she was gone, swallowed by the light. The Vindicator's bridge was a tableau of held breath. Serrano watched the telemetry die, her hand pressed flat against the tactical console as if she could reach through the metal and pull Myra back. The F-22's icon blinked once, a final burst of carrier signal, then dissolved into a smear of radiation. On the view screen, the World Shaper convulsed. Cracks of blue-white energy spidered across its hull. The emitter shut down, but something worse was happening inside. She's breached, the sensor officer reported, reading massive energy fluctuations in the alien ship's core. It's not a detonation, it's a cascade. A private channel pinged. Serrano accepted it with a tap, expecting a damage assessment. Instead, Myra's voice returned, thin and glitching, like a radio station caught between frequencies. Alessandra, I need you to listen, I'm inside. Serrano's throat closed. You're alive. Not exactly. I jettisoned my core engram before impact. I'm spreading through the World Shaper's network, firewalls, life support, weapon controls. It's like swimming through barbed wire, but I'm in. A burst of data followed, highlighting the ship's internal architecture. There's a dimensional gate in the central chamber. The Singularity torpedo is still armed, but I can't detonate it remotely. The Threxan Overlord has a manual override. I'm trying to spoof it, but he's fighting me. Serrano pulled up the schematic on her display. The Overlord's sarcophagus was connected directly to the gate's control matrix. A brutal design. Only the commander could authorize a firing, which meant only the commander could stop one. If Myra wanted to collapse the gate, she'd have to go through him. What do you need? Serrano asked. Time and a distraction. The fleet needs to engage. Draw their picket ships away from the World Shaper's flank. If I can isolate the Overlord's command node, I can trigger the Singularity from within. Serrano thought of the ceasefire, of Admiral Okonkwo's voice, flat and unyielding, of the court-martial that waited for her if she committed the fleet. Then she thought of Vesper, of 30 million lights about to be snuffed out. Consider it done, she said. All ships, this is General Serrano. Ceasefire is void. Engage Threxan forces. Priority target anything between us and the World Shaper's starboard flank. Fire at will. The Vindicator's forward batteries roared. Across the human line, destroyers and cruisers surged forward, lancing coherent light and kinetic slugs into the Threxan formation. The alien armada, caught between the unexpected attack and the chaos on their flagship, reeled. Explosions stitched across the void. A Threxan carrier folded in on itself, its reactor breached. Fighters tangled in a deadly ballet. Inside the World Shaper's digital veins, Myra waged her own war. She was no longer a pilot, she was a virus, a ghost in the machine, slipping through data streams and overriding command protocols. The Threxan Overlord's consciousness pushed back, a heavy, ancient mind that had dominated countless worlds. It flooded the network with purging code, trying to sandblast her from its systems. You cannot defeat me, the Overlord hissed through the ship's intercom, its voice a grating chorus of clicks. I have consumed civilizations. You are a fragment of a dying species. Myra caught a tendril of its ego code and sliced it clean. You've never fought a dead woman with nothing to lose. She reached the gate control node and found the Overlord waiting, a pulsing star of command authority, guarded by layers of adaptive encryption. The Singularity torpedo's trigger sat beyond it, a single button in a digital sea. Myra did not hesitate. She poured every scrap of her being into a direct assault, burning her memory banks as fuel. The first layer of defense shattered. The second. The third screamed and gave way. The Overlord threw tendrils of corrosive code, stripping her of everything: her name, her past, her last image of Serrano's face. She held on to one thing only: the coordinates of the torpedo. And then, just as the Overlord's final barrier cracked, Serrano's voice cut through on a narrow-beam frequency, meant only for her. "Myra, I never told you this, but I should have. You were the best pilot I ever knew, and you were my friend. Come back from this one, please." Myra's code wavered. Then she dove through the last firebreak, seized the trigger, and pulled it with a will that would not die. The interior of the World Shaper was not metal, it was grown. Corridors spiraled in organic whorls of chitin and sinew, the walls humming with the wet pulse of biological machinery. Drones skittered along the ceiling, seeking the intruder, but Myra had already abandoned physical form. She was a ghost threading through circuitry, a whisper in the ship's nervous system. She saw through internal sensors, Threxan crew rushing to damage control stations, the Overlord's sarcophagus crackling with defensive energy. The Singularity torpedo's countdown now ran at her command. 23 seconds. She needed to ensure nothing interrupted it. "Override protocols accepted," she murmured into the system. "Disabling aft shield generators, venting coolant from reactor loop 7, opening all internal pressure doors to the central chamber." Threxan crew screamed as atmosphere shrieked from a dozen breaches. Automated systems struggled, but Myra turned them against each other. Fire suppression systems flooded corridors with inert gas, knocking out repair teams. Elevator pods rocketed upward and downward without control, jamming access tubes. She turned the ship into a labyrinth of death. The Overlord was not idle. It tore at her with bursts of raw command code, each one shredding a part of her consciousness. She felt memories unraveling, her first flight lesson, the smell of pine forests on Earth, the weight of her father's hand on her shoulder. She let them go. They were precious, but not as precious as the 30 million breathing below. "You will cease," the Overlord bellowed. "I will grant you a new body, your species will be spared, only stop this." Myra paused the countdown at 12 seconds. "You'll grant us mercy, after you plan to feed us to whatever lives in that rift. The Enclave will withdraw, we will sign binding treaties, you can live." "I'm already dead," Myra said, "and your treaties are written in ash." She released the pause. The Overlord, in a final, desperate act, triggered the Dimensional Gate's emergency startup. It had not been charged, the emitter had been aborted, but even a partial activation could tear a wound in space-time. The central chamber erupted with null light, a color that was not a color, and the air began to twist. Myra felt the rift's pull, an endless hunger reaching through the breach. For 1 microsecond she perceived the thing on the other side, a vast, formless consciousness of pure predation, waiting, salivating. It recognized her, and it laughed in a language of dying galaxies. That laugh was the last straw. Myra slammed the Singularity torpedo's trigger and let go of everything. The captive black hole unfurled. In an instant, it expanded from a subatomic point to a sphere of absolute darkness 3 meters wide, then 10, then 50. The World Shaper's central chamber ceased to exist. Walls, conduits, the Overlord's sarcophagus, all folded inward, compressed to infinite density. The Dimensional Gate collapsed with a shriek that propagated through subspace, and the rift snapped shut, severing the reaching tendril of the Predator beyond. From the outside, the human fleet saw the alien flagship bloom into a perfect sphere of shadow. The Threxan vessels caught in the event horizon's gravity well spiraled inward, crushed to monofilament strings before vanishing. The remaining alien ships fled, their hive minds shattered. Serrano watched the implosion, knuckles white. "Myra." "Silence." The shadow sphere collapsed, spent, leaving behind a debris cloud of fragmented atoms. No energy readings, no signal. The World Shaper was gone, and with it Myra Voss. The bridge crew stood frozen, staring at the dissipating wreckage. Serrano's hand drifted to the comm panel, trembling. She keyed the fleet-wide channel, but her voice failed. What could she say? That they won. That the cost had been a single life that had already been lost once before. Then her tactical officer straightened. General, receiving a faint transmission. Origin point is a relay satellite on the outer edge of the system. It's heavily degraded, but it's repeating a pattern. What pattern? The officer's eyes widened. It's saying, tell Alessandra I stole her move. Serrano choked on a sound that was half sob, half laugh. She swiped the transmission to her earpiece, and there it was, Myra's voice, fragmented, almost lost in static, but unmistakable. The signal was weak, a stray echo of her engram that had piggybacked on the singularity's radiation pulse and been caught by the relay. She was not whole. She was barely a whisper, but she was there. Get me a recovery team, Serrano ordered. Now, and lock down that relay's coordinates. If any Threxan scavengers get to her before we do, I'll burn their entire armada to slag myself. The Vindicator's crew scrambled, and for the first time in hours, the bridge felt alive with something other than dread. Myra had kept her promise. She had ended the World Shaper. Now they just had to bring her home. The relay station orbited a dead moon at the edge of the Vesper system, a lonely spindle of alloy and blinking lights that had once been a navigational beacon. Now it housed the fractured remains of a human soul. Serrano stood in the hangar bay, armor-plated vac suit sealed, watching the extraction shuttle depart. Regulations screamed that she belonged on the bridge, coordinating the fleet's defense against possible Threxan reprisal. She had delegated that authority to her XO. Some things outweighed regulation. Retrieving the last fragment of Myra Voss was one of them. Approaching the relay, General, the shuttle pilot reported. We're detecting a data overflow in the primary storage buffer. Whatever she did to get here, it's caused cascading memory corruption. The local matrix is barely holding. Is she conscious? Serrano asked. Intermittent. She's cycling through repeated phrases, navigation jargon, old songs, a recipe for something called chili. It's a mess. Serrano smiled despite herself. Myra had always made terrible chili. Get her into a secure core and bring her back. Don't lose a single bite. The recovery team worked with painstaking care. They isolated the relay's memory banks, filtering out corrupted sectors, and transferred Myra's residual code into a portable quantum crystal, a containment vessel designed for high-density digital consciousness. The process took 3 hours. Serrano waited in the bay, watching the distant pinprick of the shuttle's thrusters, replaying every conversation she'd ever had with Myra. The teasing, the arguments, the unspoken trust that had bound them across decades and death. When the shuttle returned, a technician handed her the crystal. It was no larger than a clenched fist, pulsing with faint internal light. She's in there? Serrano asked. What's left of her? The personality matrix is intact, but memory loss is extensive. She may not remember everything. She may not remember you. Serrano cradled the crystal. Then we'll remind her. The UNS Vindicator had a medical bay, but this required something else. The ship's Project Lazarus laboratory, a sealed chamber that had been dormant since Myra's engram was first transferred into the F-22. Serrano had it reactivated. Engineers wheeled in a humanoid chassis, a synthetic body eerily lifelike, with hair the color of dark honey and eyes that could simulate the full range of human expression. It had been stored as a prototype, never used. Now it had a purpose. The upload took a full day. Serrano stayed in the lab, sleeping in a chair, waking every hour to check the progress bars. By the time the final neural linkage synced, she felt hollowed out with exhaustion and hope. The chassis powered up. Eyelids fluttered, fingers twitched. The chest rose in a simulated breath, and then Myra Voss sat up, blinking at the sterile lights. Alessandra, her voice was raw, newly minted. Where am I? Last thing I remember, I was diving into a storm on Europa. Did I make it? Serrano's heart clenched. The memory loss was worse than they'd feared. Myra didn't remember the world shaper, the sacrifice, the 32 years as a ghost pilot. You made it, Serrano said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. You've been away for a while. There's a lot to catch up on. Myra looked down at her hands, synthetic and perfect, and flexed them with a kind of wonder. I feel strange, like I'm not all here. You're here enough. Serrano extended a hand. Welcome back, Captain. We've got work to do. Myra took the hand, and her grip was firm, real, alive. She didn't remember the battle, but somewhere in her code, the instincts remained. The readiness, the unyielding spark that had made her the finest pilot Serrano had ever known. And as they walked out of the lab together, Serrano realized something. The Threxan had tried to open a door to a predator beyond comprehension. They had nearly succeeded, but now they had angered something far worse than any extra-dimensional horror. They had angered a species that refused to let its heroes die. The fleet regrouped. The data Myra had stolen from the World Shaper revealed the location of the Threxan Enclave's High Council, along with the coordinates of 3 other dormant rift drills. The war was far from over, but for the first time since the ceasefire had been broken, humanity had a clear target, a weapon, and a ghost reborn to lead the charge. Serrano stood on the bridge, Myra beside her in a new uniform, and addressed the fleet. This is General Serrano. The Threxan thought they could break us with a ceasefire while they prepared genocide. They thought we would stand down and let Vesper burn. They were wrong. Today we mourn those we lost. Tomorrow we take the fight to them. All ships set course for the Threxan core. Ghost Actual will fly point. Myra smiled, and it was not a predatory grin. It was the smile of a woman who had already died once, looked extinction in the face, and discovered that the universe could not keep her. The fleet jumped to hyperspace, and the hunt began. The Threxan core system burned with the light of dying stars. 3 weeks had passed since the World Shaper's destruction, and the human fleet had carved a path straight through the Enclave's defensive perimeter. Serrano commanded from the Vindicator's bridge, but her eyes kept drifting to the tactical icon representing Ghost Actual, now a heavily modified F-22 Shadow, a next-generation fighter built around the quantum crystal containing Myra's consciousness. She had refused to stay in the synthetic body. I'm a pilot, she had said, her voice carrying that familiar rasp. Put me back where I belong. The engineers had complied. The new airframe was sleeker, faster, armed with twin singularity lances reverse-engineered from the torpedo technology. And at its heart, Myra flew again. Now the fleet faced its true target, the Threxan High Citadel, a moon-sized station orbiting a pulsar that the Enclave had harnessed as a power source. Intelligence confirmed 3 additional rift drills were housed within, each one capable of breaching the dimensional barrier and unleashing the predators Myra had glimpsed during her dive. The aliens had not abandoned their plan. They had accelerated it. All ships report readiness, Serrano ordered. Confirmations rolled in. Destroyers, cruisers, carriers, the gathered might of 3 human expeditionary groups. They had come to end the threat, whatever the cost. Myra, Serrano said on a private channel, you have the approach. What do you see? Myra's voice came through clear, her synthetic body's limitations left behind for the purity of machine sense. The Citadel's defenses are layered. Plasma batteries, gravity mines, a fighter screen numbering in the tens of thousands. They know we're here. They're not running. Would you? No, Myra said. But I'm not them. They think they're fighting for survival. They don't realize they're fighting for the right to commit suicide. Those rift drills will consume them as surely as they'll consume us. The predators don't care who opens the door. Serrano studied the tactical display. The Citadel's energy signature was spiking. The drills were cycling up. We have minutes, not hours. Can you get inside and shut them down? I've done it before. That was one ship, this is a fortress. Myra's reply came with a hint of amusement. Then it's a bigger storm. I've never minded the rain. The battle began with a synchronized missile barrage. Thousands of warheads streaked toward the citadel, drawing the Threxan fighter screen into a defensive frenzy. Myra slipped through the chaos, her shadow running silent, its stealth systems bleeding her heat signature into subspace. She threaded between gravity mines that could crush a cruiser, skimmed the edge of a plasma battery's firing arc, and dove into the Citadel's exhaust port, a shaft meant for venting reactor waste, unguarded because no organic pilot could survive the radiation. She was not organic. Inside the shaft, the radiation clawed at her systems, scrambling sensors and corrupting navigation buffers. Myra leaned on instinct, the same instinct that had guided her through Europa's storm, through the World Shaper's guts. She found the central power conduit and followed it to the core. The three rift drills sat in a triangular formation, their null light already bleeding through half-formed apertures. In the control chamber, the Threxan High Overlord, a creature so ancient its carapace had calcified into a throne, awaited her. "You again," it clicked, its voice resonating through the station's comms. "The dead one, you cannot stop the opening. The hungry ones will feast on your galaxy and we will be spared." "You won't be spared," Myra said, locking her weapons. "You'll be the appetizer." She fired the singularity lances. Twin beams of compressed gravity punched through the first drill's containment ring, destabilizing the rift. It collapsed with a shriek that shook the Citadel's foundations. The second drill overloaded as she strafed its power couplings, showering the chamber with molten alloy. The third, the largest, remained active, its aperture widening. The High Overlord screamed commands, but the Threxan crew were fleeing, their hive mind fracturing. Myra saw the aperture stabilize and beyond it the Predator. The same vast, formless hunger she had glimpsed before, now pressing against the thinning barrier, eager to pour through. "You want a meal," Myra said. "Eat this." She dumped her reactor core into a cascade overload and ejected her consciousness crystal a microsecond before the shadow detonated. The explosion ripped through the aperture just as the Predator lunged, severing its reaching limb and sealing the rift in a catastrophic implosion. The Citadel cracked apart. From the Vindicator, Serrano watched the station fracture, spilling atmosphere and debris. The tactical display showed no trace of the shadow. Her heart seized, then a single signal pinged. The consciousness crystal, drifting in the wreckage, broadcasting a simple string of code. "Still here, come get me." Serrano exhaled, and the bridge crew erupted in ragged cheers. 3 days later, Myra sat in the Vindicator's observation lounge, inhabiting the synthetic body once more. The viewport showed the pulsar's rhythmic glow, a lighthouse in the wreckage-strewn dark. Serrano joined her, 2 cups of coffee in hand, real coffee from the officers' mess, terrible and scalding, and exactly what they both needed. "The extra-dimensional incursion has been neutralized," Serrano said. "The remaining Threxan factions are suing for unconditional surrender. Turns out watching your God-Eater get blown up by a dead woman changes your negotiating position." Myra took the coffee, her synthetic fingers wrapping around the warm ceramic. The gesture was so human it ached. "I remember now," she said. "Europa, the World Shaper, all of it. The gaps are closing." "Good. I was tired of reminding you about the chili recipe." Myra laughed, a real laugh, rough and genuine. "I still make terrible chili." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the pulsar pulse. Outside, repair crews swarmed over damaged ships. Memorial services were being prepared for the fallen. Messages were streaming in from Earth, from Vesper, from colonies that had been saved without ever knowing how close they had come to annihilation. "What now?" Myra asked. Serrano sipped her coffee. "Command wants to decommission the Ghost program. Again. They say the ethical concerns haven't changed. A dead woman flying into suicide missions sets a dangerous precedent. And what do you say? I say that no order, no regulation, no ceasefire can silence a human soul that knows what must be done. You proved that twice now. The precedent isn't dangerous. It's necessary. Serrano turned to face her. I'm resigning my commission. Fleet politics have made it clear that blind obedience matters more than protecting civilians. I won't serve a command structure that prioritizes treaties over lives. Myra set down her cup. Then what will you do? I'm starting something new, an independent defense force. No politicians, no admirals who answer to corporate donors. Just pilots, ships, and the will to protect the colonies that Earth has forgotten. I want you to fly with me, not as a ghost, as my wingmate. Myra looked at her hands again, the synthetic body, the borrowed flesh. She was not fully human, not fully machine. She was something in between, something new, but she had always been that. Even before Europa, a pilot who loved the sky more than the ground, a woman who had never known how to stop fighting for the people behind her. You'll still make terrible coffee, she asked. Worse than ever. Myra smiled, and it was the smile Serrano remembered from I.O., from the officers' mess, from 1,000 briefings and 100 battles. Then I'm in. Let's go steal a ship. Outside, the pulsar kept its steady rhythm, and beyond it, countless stars waited, some peaceful, some threatening, all of them calling. And the woman who had died twice, who had turned herself into a weapon and a legend and a promise, stood up, ready to answer.